All right, for his analysis on the final 24 hours as we head into tomorrow's election budget, I want to bring the national editor at the Australian newspaper, Dennis Shanahan, who's joining me in the studio here in Canberra. I tell you what, a lot of weight on Josh Frydenberg's shoulders tonight.
Well, I think there's actually too much weight on Josh Frydenberg's shoulders because they're relying too much on this budget to try and do too much. Look, there is no way any budget, let alone a budget with only 8 weeks to go to an election, is going to save the coalition from the poll depths that they're in at the moment. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to lose the election or that the budget can't help, but they're expecting too much from the budget. And the other difficulty that Josh has got is that it's trying to do competing things. On the one hand, the Prime Minister says today it's about the cost of living, and we've got to ease those pressures of the cost of living. Yes, that is what people want, but it's also about good management and trying to cut spending. And so, on the other hand, the government is trying to argue, oh, because we're better economic managers, we can then afford to spend this money. It's contradictory. They're appealing to different parts of the electorate and they're not going to get back the Conservative base that they've lost because they're still trying to spend too much money. It's too difficult. As long as it doesn't do any harm, as long as it doesn't hurt the government, the budget will be a success from Josh Frydenberg's point of view.
I want to ask you about Anthony Albanese because I think I've got a grab here I want to show you. Today at his press conference, about many other things, I've gone through some of it in my editorial then, he really lowered expectations about what we can expect out of his budget address in reply, which is his contribution on Thursday night. Let's have a listen.
So let's be very clear. Thursday night is a speech. It is not an alternative budget.
Now, I've worked for opposition leaders. I think I've seen 8 of those budget address in reply. And I tell you what, in an election year, it's not a mini budget. I'm not saying that, but there's always plenty of content. All the leaders I worked for had announcements in that budget in reply. This is a squibbing out, isn't it?
Well, it certainly seems to be. And again, the Labor Party is saying, well, there's not much we can do about debt and deficits. We're facing a decade of deficits. So let's complain about what the government's doing, maintain a small target and not put up anything that we really intend to do. Now, I noticed that Anthony Albanese today said, oh, there might be something on health and Medicare during the campaign. Well, hold on. This budget in reply on Thursday night is essentially a campaign launch.
Of course it is.
And to say, oh, it's not an alternative budget. Well, it is an alternative budget and he really needs to demonstrate more than just complaints about the government and looking at, the failures of the Morrison government.
Particularly because he has no economic record of his own prior to getting into this role. I mean, we know about his defence record. I've gone through that tonight. But he's never been in an economic portfolio. He's got to step up.
Well, see, this is part of the problem. Previously, he hasn't really ventured into foreign affairs and defence. He hasn't really. The big speech he gave just last week or the week before, was one of the first he'd done. On economics, he says he was infrastructure minister. Yes, he was, but that's different. That's spending money. That's not trying to save money.
Not a central agency. Not a central agency.
That's right. Not a big spending central agency. So I think that he's trying to play down the expectations because basically Labor doesn't want to talk about the budget or the economy. It wants to talk about a whole range of other things because it's in their interest to do so.
Talk to me about the New South Wales division of the Liberal Party. Big news over the weekend. There's been a federal intervention, a takeover. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree from members who are pretty cranky about it. We're talking about pre-selections now cancelled in a following set of seats. Parramatta, Hughes, Eden Monaro, all must win. Certainly Hughes and Eden Monaro. Warringah, Fowler, Grainler, McMahon, Newcastle. Warringah should be far more competitive than it is. They haven't got a candidate. And, of course, we hear this afternoon our colleague, Andrew Clennell, saying David Elliott, New South Wales state minister's thinking about having a run at Canberra in the seat of Parramatta.
Well, I think it's probably unlikely that David Elliott will end up doing it, but it is symbolic of the mess that the Liberal Party in New South Wales is in. It's been riven by factions for almost decades now, and each year at each election just gets worse and worse. And the heads of the various factions don't seem to be able to control what's going on. You've got legal challenges, and we're 8 weeks out from an election. And as you say, there are key must-win seats for the Liberals in New South Wales where they don't actually have candidates. And really, you know, in Parramatta, in Labor is having trouble with parachuting somebody into Parramatta. They're parachuting someone into Fowler. These are problems that the Liberals should be able to take advantage of in that Western Sydney where they can appeal to more people, and yet they don't have candidates. This is really one of the weakest parts of the federal coalition's attempts to hold on to government.
Just a quick comment. You've seen a lot of prime ministers in your time. You've also seen a lot of US presidents. This commentary in a speech, at the end of a speech, some think it was off the cuff, others say it was just written in, but the expression was wrong, where Biden basically calls for regime change in Russia, and there's been this huge mop-up job. This is not the president we need in these times.
No, it's not. And look, you can't dismiss these comments. Don't forget that North Korea invaded South Korea after loose statements at the National Press Club by the US Secretary of State in 1950. They took it as a sign to invade. The Soviet Union may very well have taken a sign from Joe Biden when he said we weren't going to send in US troops to invade the Ukraine. The Afghanistan was a disaster. This latest comment, which the White House has described as unscripted, has played right into the hands of Vladimir Putin. This is appalling lack of discipline, a lack of knowledge and real politic about what's happening in the world from a president of the United States. All I can say is I hope he continues to be the president of the United States, because we don't want any short-term fill-ins.
We do not. But, I mean, he's been on the world stage, Biden, for a long time.
Should know better.
I think it's cognitive failure. Dennis Shanahan, thank you as always. Good to actually be in person.
Indeed.
2 years.
Yes, glad to be here.